Hey there, welcome back to the Style Sessions. This is session number 10 on Vienna Lagers. I'm Roger Mittag. I'm the founder of Prud'homme Beer Certification and thrilled once again to host you for another one of our look at a variety of different beer styles. And today we're going to focus on the beer style of Vienna Lager. In North America, a lot of times we refer to these as amber lagers, but the origin comes from Vienna. So we're going to pour this beer. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history of the style itself. So the beer I'm featuring today is St. Andre. This was the very, very first Vienna lager that I've ever seen in Canada and Ontario. And it disappeared for a little while, but I'm really glad that it's come back because I've always thought that it was an iconic version of this particular style. So let's give it a pour. I'm using a much taller glass today. This is called a Linnea. And the reason I'm using tall and a little bit slender glass is even though this has got lots of malt characteristics in it, it is designed as a thirst quencher. So let's give it a pour and then we can actually see what's going on. There we go. So, such a beautiful looking beer. You've got this really nice, buttery, creamy colored foam on the top, almost a new ivory. It is this old gold, light amber, almost peach or apricot color to it. It's crystal clear, again, with Germanic styles, we expect a little bit of clarity. With craft beers, we forgive a little bit of the clarity because a lot of craft brewers don't filter as much. But great stuff. When you put this to your nose, there's so many interesting things that come out of this. One of the things that you should look for definitely is caramel. Maybe a hint of toffee, but you might get some butterscotch. Like think about Werther's candies. You might get a little bit of pastry, almost apple pie kind of characteristics. You definitely should look for some stone fruit in there, maybe some apricot, maybe a little bit of peach. Whole grain breads as opposed to darker breads or white breads. A little bit of bread crust, raisins. But some really nice baked apple notes in here as well, along with the caramel. If you can imagine like what a butter tart might smell like, that's exactly what we're expecting in this type of beer. Well, I haven't had this in a long time. It's so good. It's just exactly how I remember it. So when you taste a Vienna lager, it's going to come in very gently. It's going to have soft carbonation in it. It's going to be very lightly spritzy. It's going to finish not quickly, but moderately. So it's going to take a little bit of longer time for it to exit your mouth. And I'll explain why in a minute. And then the aftertaste is slightly moderate as well. And in the aftertaste, you might get a little bit of density, a little bit of bitterness in there. But it's not going to be a very intense bitterness. Think almost like an oversteeped orange pekoe tea. There's going to be a touch of that in there as well. And then flavor profile. Again, lots of the caramel, pastry, whole grain breads. It's a pretty simple beer from that perspective. It has more aromatics than it does flavors. But they are meant to be consumed, again, cold and easy to drink. A fantastic thing to do with all kinds of different foods, especially, as I said before, apple pies, butter tarts. Great with burgers. It's good with most things because it's not too intense on one side and it's not too light on the other side. So it tends to go with a lot of different foods. So let me tell you a bit about the style and the history of it. So in earlier sessions, especially in the Munich Dunkel session, I talked about two brewers who were friends who traveled throughout Europe to learn new techniques. So the brewer at the Vienna brewery was Anton Dreher. And Anton Dreher was a very prolific influence on brewing, especially in Vienna, but also in Bohemia and in Munich. And what Dreher did was started using these lighter colored malts. Now, back in England, these malts were being used to produce something that we now know as pale ales. And the reason they were called pale ales is because they were paler than anything else that was in the marketplace at that time. So all British beers were dark. So I think Dreher was very fascinated with these lighter colored malts. So he started using them, and then he created this beer that has this beautiful light or dark gold and light amber color to it, and has all these rich, beautiful flavors that come out of it. Now, it's really interesting that when we talk to people about the kinds of flavors and aromas that are in this particular beer, a lot of people think that we might add those characteristics into the brewing process. But caramel or crystal malts add a lot of protein into beer, which is what's creating that mouthfeel that I explained earlier. So when you have a lot of proteins and you're using caramel or crystal malts, it tends to add a little bit more texture and body into your beer. So you get a little bit more of that fuller taste. But the other thing is those malts, depending on how they're actually made, contribute a lot of those dark fruit flavors that we were talking about earlier, that caramel, the toffee, the dates, raisins. Those are all coming from the malts. And this is definitely a beer that doesn't really have any of the darker characteristics. So don't expect any umami, don't expect any chocolate or coffee with this one. This one is really all in that range that we talked about. It's an amazing beer. You'll see a few examples of it around. I'm starting to see more craft brewers make this style of beer. But I still think it's got lots of weight, and people will explore this beer when they want something that's a little bit more full-bodied. So having said that, our next session is going to be on the German Pilsner, and I hope that you'll find the time to join us. I hope you're enjoying yourselves and that you're learning a little bit more about beer styles that I find to be traditional and always have great stories behind them. Cheers.